Sabrina 90s comic issue 24. We start out with Zelda telling Sabrina that it's time to get up, and the doorbell rings. And when Hilda answers it, she sees a leprechaun holding flowers asking if Sabrina lives here. It's creative that he has white hair instead of orange at least. He says he's here to win the heart of the beautiful witch. Somehow think he has a chance with someone he should know is a teenager, while he's way too old. Hilda tells him to get lost, so he turns Sabrina's aunts into shamrocks, but it's apparently merciful enough to let them keep the ability to talk. Salem says that he's better off pretending to be a normal cat instead of trying to provoke the leprechaun. The concept of a short older man trying to win the heart of Sabrina was actually done in the sitcom too, and it was even creepier there. He even kidnapped her and Harvey had to save her. But at least here I don't have to listen to a horribly raspy voice, so this will be better. Sabrina screams at seeing Casey flirt with her in her bed, and she complains that her powers aren't working against him. I guess she forgot that fact from the last time she had to deal with a leprechaun, because it was so arbitrary. I think this scene drags on a little bit longer than it has to. As I expected, because it's a work of fiction, he knows the leprechaun we saw earlier because he's one too, and expects us to believe that Heather is his old girlfriend, even though she looks way younger than him, to the point where nobody questioned her being in high school. I guess the norms are different on the leprechaun world, or he doesn't care what people thinks. But he was so lucky she settled for him. He says that he should have known Heather was untrustworthy even before she dumped him. Aw, he would have earned some respect from me if he dumped her. I guess what he saw in her was her looks. Sabrina's actually happy to find out that because she annoyed Heather so much, she told Casey all about her. He assumes she's honest and trustworthy, everything Heather hates. But why would she? Also, why would he just assume she's like that? I don't think Heather knew her long enough. I guess the reason it took so long for this guy with a girl's name to bother Sabrina was that Heather didn't tell him about Sabrina until she happened to bump into him at the grocery store later. And she talked about Sabrina with him to get back at her this way. Sabrina tells Casey that they can discuss this later because she needs to get dressed. I guess she thinks that there's no point in bringing up the fact that they have an obvious, unsettling age difference, because he has to know that and not care, so what's the point of saying it? Sabrina talks to her aunts, and whispers that she might be able to find out where Casey's stash of gold is if she acts like she's interested, which was the obvious idea from the start. I feel like showing her talking to her aunts was a waste of time because she just told them recap that we already know. It was sweet of Casey to bring her breakfast on a silver platter. She says that it smells delicious and acts happy about green eggs, and he says that they aren't just for St. Paddy's Day anymore. I think I remember hearing that the Irish don't want it to be called St. Paddy's Day. That there's some kind of way of referring to that day that's an American mispronunciation of it. So if the writer got that wrong, that'd be weird because this is literally a leprechaun. So how would he get it wrong? Anyways, Sabrina hates the food, but pretends not to, and tells them that they shouldn't have any secrets from each other. She's being way too obvious by saying this. He shouldn't even be saying such as, because it's obvious she's after his gold. They even discussed gold. There's an explosion, and Casey asks if he left the gas on, and out of nowhere, Heather warps to Sabrina and yells at her for trying to steal her boyfriend, when there's no indication that she knew this was in the process of happening. The only way she know about this is either Casey told her, in which case what took her so long to come here, or she looked in a crystal ball, after miraculously deciding to spy on Casey with it on a whim. I was under the impression of anything that Heather intentionally sent Casey after Sabrina for revenge, knowing that she wouldn't be interested in him. That'd make more sense. But instead Heather's possessive of someone she dumped earlier, and says that she didn't think he'd come after her. It'd be interesting if she sided with Sabrina instead of being mad at her, and the writing was realistic by having her call out Casey on the age difference. People complain about Jeffrey dating Sally, but here I can clearly see the age difference. Casey calls Heather out on being too fickle. I'm so glad we got to see her again, because that would have been a waste of a character otherwise. She threatens Sabrina with her magic, but Casey actually protects her, and the magic fight makes a bunch of noise that gets Morton to tell Sabrina to keep it down this early. He threatens to call the authorities, and I was satisfied when Heather said, "Go mind your own business, you annoying old goat," and turns him into a goat. Even Sabrina's answer like, That's the first good thing I've seen them do. Although of course it would be the first, because Sabrina's aunts have barely seen these two. And Sabrina's being established as more of a good person than her aunts because she's mortified for some reason, while they're equally happy as each other. Heather gives Morton a newspaper to chew, and Sabrina tells the leprechauns to settle their differences and leave her out of it. Having given up on pretending to be interested because she's scared of Heather, Sabrina says she's not Casey's girlfriend, and Heather angrily asks if Sabrina thinks he's not good enough for her. Sabrina asks how they can settle this once and for all, and Heather suggests a magic duel with the winner getting Casey, but unfortunately Heather says that the loser will really suffer. Then the comedy page, Sabrina tries to eat cereal and then asks where her box went. Salem has it, and says that it makes much more interesting reading than his cat food can. It's interesting how desperate Salem tends to be for fun when he's trapped as a cat. The comics got me used to Salem being able to use his hands like a person by this point, after the sitcom just had him move like a real cat, which makes more sense as a limitation for a curse, and because of budget. But I'll still be weirded out if Salem walks around on his feet like in the animated series. I prefer seeing him walk like a cat since he is one. And it's sort of defeat the purpose of trapping him as a cat if he can walk around and do most of what a person can do anyways. Sabrina asks how she could use her magic when she's powerless against Heather right now. And Heather says that if she got her hands on her gold, she'd overpower her and force her to grant her wish. And that's why the Leprechauns and Witches Union came up with an amulet that allows Sabrina's powers to be equal to that of leprechauns, without revealing where the gold is hidden. Thank you, comic, for referencing the Witches' Council. Even if it's called a union instead, that's better than nothing. And it makes sense that the leprechauns have a council too. I'm pleasantly surprised that they told us that. Heather tells Sabrina to be at the city park at dawn. Dawn? Maybe she wants extra time to think up a battle strategy. And it's not really padding, because either way, the story immediately cuts to dawn. How is Sabrina supposed to know exactly when dawn would be? I guess she googled it, because the time of dawn changes depending on the season. The point is, it would have made much more sense for Heather to have given Sabrina an exact time of day. Even though Heather's late, she still shows up immediately. Sabrina's smart enough to conjure up a magic shield to deflect Heather's beam right away. Heather then levitates Salem as a distraction while she uses her magic to give Sabrina bunny ears. Really? I guess the reason the magic shield disappeared was that Sabrina wasn't concentrating on it anymore. Why is that the case for that spell and not every other spell? There's no way Enchantress spends all day every day concentrating on keeping Salem a cat, for example. So the rule is, there is spell inertia. But the magic shield is probably not a physical object, and it's just a representation of Sabrina keeping magic away from her. So it wouldn't keep existing without her thinking about the beam not hitting it. Couldn't Sabrina generate a literal shield and then enchant it against magic? Wouldn't Heather do the same thing? But she's angrier, so she'd be more offense-oriented. Sabrina gives Heather a red tail, wanting to humiliate her back. Then they start fighting in a dust cloud out of nowhere that doesn't actually let us see what's going on because the writer and artist got lazy. You'd think Sabrina would have just used magic to make Heather unable to move right away, and win the fight instantly. That was obvious immediately, but apparently that thought didn't even occur to her. She could have trapped her in a huge block of ice and won immediately. It was never established the ground rules for what spells are cheating like that. But I guess the logic that makes this work is that there's billions of different spells they could do, so it's harder for them to think of the best one to use. Still, they both had hours before the fight. And yet neither of them came into it right away with the smartest idea to make their opponent unable to do anything. It's a good thing Heather isn't murderous, because she could have killed Sabrina in one attack easily, so apparently she's got standards. They mostly just care about humiliating the other. It turns out Sabrina's outmatched. But because the fight cut ahead, I don't know why. Sabrina unfortunately justifies that Heather's been doing this a lot longer than her. But I didn't notice because they're both too stupid to just instantly win the fight. Salem then whispers to her that she should look at something strange, and Sabrina whispers that there's 3 Civil War statues. Usually there's just the one of Colonel Westbridge, and 2 of them are Confederate soldiers, when the colonel was a Union officer. So Salem says that this must be their gold in disguise, because apparently, not only were the leprechauns dumb enough to not have the soldiers all have the same uniform, not only did they take the dumb risk of making their gold a monument, which would call attention to it instead of simply making it a random blade of grass, or invisible, or making it tiny and kept in their pockets. But also, these two leprechauns decided to keep their gold together, which must have been a decision they made after the duel idea was proposed. Why? I thought they hated each other. They can affect the gold with magic by changing the way it looks. Now, I was wondering why Heather wasn't paying attention to Sabrina talking to her cat, and it turns out it was because she had immediately gone to talk to Casey. Salem jumps into Heather's arms, revealing that he can talk, which shocks her, and he wastes time talking to her before biting her finger, when she could have easily forced him out of her arms in all that time. Then Sabrina zaps away the outside layer of the bogus statues, which she probably knew shouldn't have been there because she's been to this park a lot off screen her whole life. She finds the gold, and her first wish is for Heather to cancel out all the things her powers have done. Hopefully she just means for the day, because otherwise, like, what if Heather did some good things with her magic, and this canceled out those? But I doubt that. Then her other wish is that Heather and Casey would be happy together forever, even though they like to argue. But she doesn't want them to bother her anymore. And apparently they're so perfectly in sync as people that they both said the same sentence without rehearsal. So their personalities can't be that different. But Casey was nice the whole story, while Heather isn't. It's good that the artist draws hearts around them and draws their eyes this way when he tells her to go get reacquainted with him. And she says that she'd love to. Love potion or not, I can't help but find this heartwarming to see. Since when do we see Heather this nice? Casey thanks Sabrina for everything and says goodbye, which is also polite of him. He's definitely better than the short guy from the show, that's for sure. He made more sense too. Sabrina could have easily just wished for them to stop bothering her and go dedicate their lives to charity, and that would have been more good. I guess she really wasn't thinking ahead. Because it's obviously more morally great for her to wish that they'd be brainwashed into being in love with each other, and so their love isn't really real. But I guess it's justified by her being a naive teenager who doesn't think things through. Anyways, the story ends with Zelda asking Morton why he's at the park, and he realizes he's been eating grass, and wants to get home and gargle. Then the next story, Sabrina tells Salem to wake up in his cat bed because he volunteered too when it's not even daylight yet. Despite being a teenager, Sabrina's cheerful about waking up early, saying that this is the time you do this sort of thing. They go to the magic closet because they promised Cousin Esmeralda they'd take over her other realm paper route for the day. So witches still read newspapers instead of them all going bankrupt from centuries of having the internet. You'd think witches would be technologically ahead, because they'd immediately have all the free time in the world to research science and stuff. Salem's jealous that Esmeralda gets to go on a school field trip, because he's always cooped up in the house. Salem says this is easy, and Sabrina's surprised because from the way her cousin was talking, she was expecting problems. They hear a barking dog, and after Sabrina reassures Salem that she can protect him, he taunts the dog, who turns out to be magical. Rather than casting a spell on him to make him not ever want to hurt anybody again, Sabrina puts her vacuum on fast mode, but the dog multiplies itself to threaten them, and Sabrina flies the vacuum upwards. Salem says that he feels very warm, and Sabrina says that she feels like there's smelly hot breath on her. And it's justified that Sabrina can't really do anything against the dog, because one, it's someone's pet, she might get Esmeralda in trouble, and then she'd be in trouble. And two, it's a magical dog, so maybe it's immune to magic. But that needs to be explained. The dog grows into a giant, and Sabrina gives up on the paper route. The next day, Salem's still trembling, and Sabrina asks Esmeralda how she did filling in for her, and asks if she had any complaints, even though she should know there's going to be tons of complaints because she ditched the paper route. Then it turns out that the only one who got missed was the magical dog, whose master orders the newspaper from every day. And he actually followed Esmeralda here, but every morning he's in a bad mood until he checks out the comic strips and laughs. That's a creative twist. It takes even further advantage of him being a magical dog. Sabrina's optimistic, cheering up right away and saying that's amazing, and Salem says relatably, who would have thought he even had a sense of humor? The first story was by Bill Gallagher, and it's about the creepy concept of a leprechaun with white hair trying to date Sabrina, and the age difference is never lampshaded. On the bright side, it's not just about that. He's actually nice to her the whole time. He doesn't kidnap her and force her to live in his castle. And he wants her because he wants someone honest and trustworthy, liking her for who she is, as apparently Casey knows her personality. It's really confusing that his ex-girlfriend Heather not only looks too young for him too, but also gets mad at Sabrina for this and doesn't want Casey to date Sabrina, but never says that it's because of the age difference either. She's still possessive of him even though she dumped him, so it must have been for a reason. I assumed she sent Casey to Sabrina on purpose for revenge, but that makes too much sense. At least Heather showing up probably severely sped up Sabrina getting to find his gold, so she wouldn't have to pretend to be interested in him, which would suck when she has to go to high school, so it was worth it. I'm glad Heather showed up again. She miraculously discovers Casey was with Sabrina and challenges Sabrina to a magic duel, which is just about them humiliating each other with no injuries, because it turns out they both have standards. At least that's creative. But I still have to wonder why, after hours to think about how to fight in the duel, neither of them thought to freeze their opponent still. And then seeing them alert Sabrina's attention to their disguised gold, which wasn't kept invisible for some reason, and instead was an obvious fake pair of soldier statues in the park, instead of something way less conspicuous. So Sabrina gets suspicious and finds the gold because they're idiots, and forces Heather to not only turn her aunts and Morton back to normal, but also live happily ever after with Casey. The story was kind of epic because the stakes were high, making for great artificial tension. The second story is about Sabrina on a vacuum flight delivering newspapers for her cousin in the other realm, just to not deliver a paper to a magical dog because he scared her, and didn't have the ability to talk and simply tell her that he wanted the paper. You'd think that Esmeralda would have told her from the start that there would be a dog looking like this who she'd need to give a paper to. She could have easily avoided this entire plot. But it was interesting to see how a magical dog would threaten the paper girl and the creative twist ending where I laughed at the comic strips. But there was no explanation that the dog was immune to magic, and so she couldn't just use magic to make it docile. But if that was possible, I wonder why nobody else did it.